Have you ever noticed that your first thought about yourself in the morning sets the temperature for the entire day? Maybe you wake up, look at your phone, see something that reminds you of how far you still have to go, and before your feet have touched the floor, something in you has already decided today will be another ordinary day. Maybe you've read the books about mindset, listened to the talks, told yourself you believe in your potential, and still, underneath all of it, a quieter voice runs a different commentary. One that is faster, older, and harder to argue with. Maybe you've tried meditation, journaling, affirmations, and each one worked for a week before it became another thing you were failing at. Maybe you're beginning to suspect that the problem isn't the technique. The problem is something deeper, something in the way your mind has been wired for so long that rewiring it feels like a job for someone with more time, more discipline, more of something you don't currently have. Have you ever wondered if there was a way to train your mind that was so small, so specific, and so precisely targeted that it couldn't be failed? And whether that smallness, repeated daily, could produce changes so large they would eventually be unrecognizable? If you've ever felt like your own mind was working against you, and you didn't know how to get it working for you without overhauling your entire life, this story is for you. Because once there was a woman who spent 6 years trying to change how she thought about herself and got nowhere, until a retired neuroscience researcher showed her that the whole effort had been aimed at the wrong target. Stay with me until the end. In a coastal city where the mornings were bright and the pace was fast, and everyone seemed to be optimizing something, there lived a 31-year-old HR manager named Parl. Parl was organized, perceptive, and professionally well-regarded. The person her company sent in when a difficult conversation needed to happen, when a team was fracturing, when the human part of a business problem needed someone who could see it clearly. She was good at her work in the way that came from genuine care, not performance. But Parl carried something that her professional competence had never been able to touch. Since her early 20s, she had been aware of a pattern. Whenever something good arrived, a promotion, a relationship, an opportunity, a part of her mind immediately began cataloging the reasons it wouldn't last, not as a conscious exercise, as a reflex. Before she could enjoy the good thing, she had already located its expiry date. She believed, at the level where beliefs do their most lasting damage, not in the thoughts you choose but in the ones that arrive without being invited, that good things happen to her temporarily, and that her job was to manage the eventual return to ordinary. "I'm a realist," she would say when friends called her pessimistic, and it was true in its way. She was realistic about the world. She was catastrophically unrealistic about herself. For 6 years she had tried to change this. She had filled 7 journals. She had attended 3 personal development programs. She had a mindfulness app with a 412-day streak that had not moved the needle on the underlying voice by a single degree. The voice was quieter, maybe, but it was still there, and it was still faster than any affirmation she had ever written. In Parl's office worked a man named Talon, younger by 4 years, less experienced, and by conventional measures less equipped for the kind of senior role that Parl had been quietly preparing herself for over 3 years. Talon was not exceptional. He was not uniquely talented. What he was, in a way Parl found both baffling and faintly irritating, was consistently certain. Not arrogant, not loud, just certain. When an opportunity was announced, Talon's hand went up without the half-second hesitation that Parl's always contained. When he made a mistake, he corrected it and moved on without the 3-day internal audit that Parl conducted on herself after every misstep. He seemed to carry a baseline assumption that things would work out, not because he was naive, but because his default position was forward, and forward-facing people accumulate evidence differently than backward-facing ones. When Talon was shortlisted for a leadership program that Parl had not applied for because she had decided, quietly and without examining the decision, that she was not quite ready yet, she sat with the news for an entire evening and then told herself it didn't matter. But something in her knew she was wrong. And something in her knew she had made that decision not because she lacked readiness, but because she lacked the internal permission she had been trying to grant herself for 6 years and never quite managed. The moment that broke something open arrived not at work but at her mother's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. Her mother had asked, as she always did, how things were going, and Parl had said, as she always did, that things were fine. Good, even. And then her mother, who had raised 3 children alone after her husband left, who had built a small catering business from a borrowed pot and a borrowed kitchen, who had never once, to Parl's knowledge, described herself as not ready, looked at her daughter and said, very gently, "You know, I've noticed something. Every time something good is happening for you, you speak about it like it's already over." Parl opened her mouth to explain, to reframe, to produce the articulate self-aware response she had spent 6 years developing. Nothing came, because her mother was right. And the reason it landed so hard was not that it was new information. It was that hearing it from outside herself, in plain language, with no clinical framework around it, made it impossible to process as a personality trait to be managed. It landed as a choice, as something she was doing to herself daily, that was costing her daily, and that she had dressed up in the language of self-awareness to make it feel like wisdom rather than fear. She drove home in a state she could not name. That evening she sat at her kitchen table and wrote one sentence in her journal, not an affirmation, not a reflection, just a question. Why has nothing I've tried actually changed the voice? Parl's neighbor on the third floor was a 74-year-old retired neuroscience researcher named Radolf, who had spent 30 years studying habit formation and cognitive retraining at a university 2 cities away before retiring to what he called a life of useful quiet. He grew tomatoes on his balcony, read 2 newspapers a day, and occasionally gave a guest lecture when someone called and asked nicely enough. He and Parl had spoken perhaps a dozen times over the 3 years they had been neighbors, mostly in the hallway, mostly about the lift that was always broken. On a Monday evening, Parl knocked on his door with no plan and no prepared question. When he answered, she said simply, "I have been trying to change the way I think about myself for 6 years and nothing has worked." "You studied this for 30 years. I'm asking for help." It was the most direct sentence she had spoken about herself in recent memory. It cost her the story she had been telling, that she had it managed, that she was working on it, that she was close. She knocked on the door with none of that, just the truth. Radolf stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "I'll make tea." Radolf's kitchen was small and orderly. While the kettle boiled, he said nothing, which Parl had learned in their brief hallway conversations was not absence of thought but the presence of it. When the tea was poured, he sat across from her and placed a single object between them on the table, a small glass of water with a drop of ink just added, the dark thread of it still dispersing slowly through the clear water around it. "Watch it," he said. They watched in silence for 30 seconds. The ink spread, not evenly, not dramatically, just steadily and inevitably, claiming more of the water with each second, until the entire glass was the same faint, uniform gray. "1 drop," Radolf said. 30 seconds, the entire glass. He looked at Parl. "Your mind works the same way. One thought, repeated consistently in the same conditions, disperses through every other thought it touches. The problem is not that you have been trying to change your thinking. The problem is that you have been trying to remove the ink after it has already dispersed." He folded his hands on the table. "You cannot remove dispersed ink. You can only add clear water consistently until the ratio changes, and the minimum effective dose of clear water is smaller than you have ever been told. Here are 3 things that 6 years of journals and programs have not taught you. Law 1. The mind is not changed by volume. It is changed by repetition at the threshold. You have been trying to overwrite the limiting voice with large, sustained efforts, hour-long sessions, detailed journals, intensive programs. This is the equivalent of trying to change the color of the water by pouring in a bucket of clear water once a week. The water will return to gray. What actually changes a neural pattern is not volume but frequency at the precise moment the pattern activates. The limiting thought fires in a specific context, when something good arrives, when an opportunity appears, when your name could go forward. That is the threshold. That is the only moment the intervention needs to happen. 30 seconds at the threshold every single time is worth more than 60 minutes of general mindset work done in the abstract. Stop trying to change the glass. Change what you add to it the moment the ink drops. Law 2. Replace the thought with a question, not an answer. Every technique you have tried, affirmations, reframing, positive self-talk, has made the same structural error. It has tried to answer the limiting voice with a counter-statement. I am not good enough becomes I am more than enough. The problem is that your brain, which has been running the original pattern for 20 years, recognizes the counter-statement as a performance. It does not believe it because it was not arrived at honestly. A question, however, your brain cannot dismiss. It must process it. When the voice fires, when the good thing arrives and the expiry date reflex activates, do not counter it. Ask it one question out loud if possible in 30 seconds or less. What is the evidence right now that this is true, not rhetorical? Genuinely ask. Because 9 times in 10 the honest answer is, there is none. The voice is not reporting evidence. It is reporting fear, and fear examined shrinks. Answered it grows. Law 3. The people in your life need the version of you that believes in itself. Here is the cost of the voice that you have not fully accounted for. It is not only costing you the opportunities you do not take, the rooms you do not enter, the hands you do not raise. It is costing the people around you the version of you that would have taken those opportunities, entered those rooms, raised those hands, and changed something for them in the doing. Your mother built a business from a borrowed pot because she did not have the voice telling her the good thing was already over. She had something else. And part of why you are sitting in this kitchen tonight is because you want that something else not just for yourself, but because you are beginning to understand that the people who will be shaped by what you do next deserve the version of you that shows up fully, without the expiry date already written on the back. That version is not a different person. It is you, 30 seconds at a time, adding clear water to the glass until the gray fades. Radolf picked up the glass and tilted it slightly toward the light. The water was uniformly gray now, no trace of the original drop. How long did that take? He asked. 30 seconds, Parl said. To change the entire glass, Radolf said quietly. One drop, the right moment, consistently. He set it down. You don't need more time. You need better aim. Parl began the next morning, not with a journal entry or a program or an app. With one question, spoken quietly to herself in the bathroom mirror at 7:04 a.m. when the familiar reflex fired as she thought about the week ahead. What is the evidence, right now, that this is true? The question took 11 seconds to ask. The silence that followed it lasted 19. In those 19 seconds, her brain, which had been running the same pattern unexamined for a decade, did something it had never been given the space to do. It looked for the evidence, and found almost none. She did this every day, not for an hour, not with ceremony. 30 seconds at the moment the voice fired with the same question. Some days it fired 3 times, some days once. She asked the question every time. She wrote nothing down. She told no one. She just added clear water at the threshold daily. At the end of week 3, she applied for the leadership program that Talon was already in. Her application was accepted. The program began in February. By month 4, she had proposed and been approved to lead a company-wide well-being initiative, the first time she had put her name to something at that scale without spending a week persuading herself she was ready first. The initiative launched in September, reached all 430 staff across 3 offices, and produced a measurable 18% reduction in reported workplace stress in the first quarter of operation. She presented the results to the board herself, without the expiry date running in the background, or rather with it running and with the question ready and with the evidence as usual entirely absent. Her health changed in a way she had not anticipated. The low-level exhaustion she had carried for years, the kind that comes not from doing too much but from managing a war inside your own head, began to lift. She slept more deeply. She stopped replaying conversations at 2 in the morning. She had energy at the end of the day that she had forgotten was possible. She called her mother on a Sunday 6 months after the kitchen table conversation. "Something you said," she started. "I know," her mother said. "I've been watching you." "How do I look?" Parl asked. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, like someone who has stopped writing the ending before the story starts, she knocked on Radolf's door that evening with a small jar of honey from the market, the kind he had mentioned once, in passing, that he liked. He accepted it, looked at her face and said, "The water is clearing." "One drop at a time," Parl said. "That is the only way it ever happens," he said, and went back inside. My friend, Parl's story is not about HR or leadership programs or the mechanics of workplace performance. It is about the voice, the one that runs faster than your affirmations, older than your self-awareness, and quieter than your ambitions, that has been writing the expiry date on your good things before you have had the chance to live inside them. Every person watching this has a version of that voice. It sounds different. It fires in different rooms at different triggers in different words, but the mechanism is identical, and so is the intervention. Remember 3 things. First, stop trying to change the glass in the abstract. The only moment that matters is the threshold, the precise moment the limiting voice fires. Identify when yours fires. In what specific situation does the voice arrive? When good news comes. When your name could go forward. When something is working. That moment, not a journal session, not a Sunday morning, is where your 30 seconds belong. Second, replace every counterstatement with one question. When the voice fires, do not argue with it, do not overwrite it, do not perform a better version of yourself at it. Ask it, what is the evidence right now that this is true? Ask it out loud if you can. Give it 30 seconds to answer honestly. You will find almost every time that the evidence is absent. The voice is not a reporter. It is a habit. And habits, questioned at the moment of activation, lose their grip one repetition at a time. Third, remember who is shaped by the version of you that shows up. The fully present, permission-granted, expiry date-free version of you is not a luxury you earn after you fix yourself. It is what the people in your life are waiting for right now, not the managed version, the real one. 30 seconds a day is the price of admission. It is the smallest price ever asked for something this large. Your challenge, today, not this week, today, identify the one specific situation in which your limiting voice fires most reliably. Write it down in one sentence. Then tomorrow, when that situation arrives, ask the question. 30 seconds, that is the entire practice. Start there. Add clear water. Watch the gray change. Because here is what Parl learned and what I want you to hold. You have not been failing to change your mind. You have been aiming at the wrong moment. 30 seconds at the right moment changes everything that an hour at the wrong one never could. If this story named the voice you have been managing instead of questioning, share it with someone who needs to know that the fix is smaller and more precise than they have been told. Drop a comment and tell me, in what specific situation does your limiting voice fire most often? Naming it here is the first 30 seconds. I read everyone. I will be back next week with another story. Until then, you do not need more time. You need better aim.